Say hi again, newcomer.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
That's my audience plus one. Alright. Alright, my name's Dana Brock, and I'd like to give you guys a speech on a new finding in my field of exercise science, and that's that of alternate diets. Most of us struggled with our body image in one way or another. Maybe you were skinny and had trouble putting on muscle. Or perhaps you've had a pesky spare tire around your middle that just won't go away. Exercise, honestly, only goes so far when managing our weight. Diet is a huge part of our overall health, and there are many opinions as to what the ideal diet might be. All our lives, we have been told that dietary fat's the enemy. In response, we filled the gap with readily available and delicious carbohydrates. But research has shown time and again that our current carbohydrate-rich diet may not be the best option for our bodies. Other diets have come to prominence recently, such as the low-carb, high-fat diet and the low-carb, high-protein diet. A look at these alternate diets offers a new perspective on our relationship with the food that we eat. If we take a look at an overview of man's original diet, it gives us an interesting insight into how we react and deal with food. Your common Paleolithic man subsisted mostly on animal byproducts and plants. Carbohydrates such as grains and carb-rich tubers weren't readily available to man. So the advent of agriculture brought a lot of unwanted effects into our system. We evolved over millions of years to have a diet of mostly proteins and fats, a little bit of fructose here and there. Well, when we started cultivating grains and replacing hard-to-find animal byproducts with grains, it brought a lot of stuff that we really didn't need. Obesity largely did not exist before the advent of agriculture. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes, did not exist. Tooth decay, scurvy, gout, dementia, and cardiovascular disease did not largely exist in the Paleolithic era. Only in the last 10,000 years or so have these come up. And part of it is grains, and part of it's new advances in agriculture. But at least in America, we can blame this mostly on a gentleman named Ancel Keys. And he tried to make a link between saturated fat and cardiovascular disease in the 1950s. It kind of ended up being a little bit of a conspiracy because he had terrible science. He picked only the results from his tests that supported his hypothesis. But when he presented it to the government, lobbyists made it so that our recommended diet from the World Health Organization was mostly grains and carbohydrates, a little bit of sugars, sparing meats, and some fruits and vegetables. Another thing that happened concurrently that ended up being an issue was artificial foods used to be labeled as artificial or imitation. Late in the 1950s, they actually overturned that with an act that said they could call it real food as long as they added nutrients to it, even though it was artificial. So this brings us to the shift in dietary paradigms that's been happening over the last few years. We've realized that our high carbohydrate diet is causing a lot of problems. Several studies dating back to the 1970s have substantiated this. So Dr. Atkins introduced a diet in the late 1990s called the Atkins diet, which is extremely low carb to the point that it induces a state called ketosis, in which instead of burning carbohydrates for fuel, our body burns an alcohol called ketones. There's been a lot of conflicting studies on whether the Atkins diet is safe in the long term. but for most, it's beneficial and solves very many problems, such as type 2 diabetics who have been struggling with insulin dependency. Largely on the Atkins-style diet, they do not even need to take their insulin. Their blood sugar is balanced. Branching from the Atkins diet, you have a few other diets called the ketogenic, paleo, or primal diets, and those are an effort to eat in the way that we imagine Paleolithic man would have eaten. So, sparing fruits, lots of green leafy vegetables, and lots of animal products. Of course, food is a lot more readily available than it was back in those days, so we can eat as much meat as we want, which is a whole nother can of worms, but on the most part, a lot of people are seeing really good results for balancing weight, insulin dependency is going down, and cases of renal failure are being reduced, and renal cancer are going way down with these diets. The New England Journal of Medicine found in a comparison of a high carbohydrate diet and a ketogenic and Mediterranean diet, which is high in saturated fat, the more favorable effects on lipids with the low carbohydrate diet and on glycemic control, which is the amount of blood sugar you have, with the Mediterranean diet, suggests that personal preferences and metabolic considerations might inform individualized tailoring of dietary interventions. And by that, they mean if you're having trouble with your weight, if you're having trouble with sleeping, if you're having trouble with renal failure, if you're having trouble with diabetes, a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet is probably the solution for you. From an athletic perspective, it's very beneficial at the top level of athletics. Mark Sisson, who is an expert dietitian and weightlifter, wrote a book called The Primal Blueprint, which is a great source for anybody wanting to build strength and get away from high carbohydrate diet. And you also have Dr. Lauren Cordain's paleo diet, which is, as explained before, largely based on meat and vegetables, very little grains and carbohydrates. So, our perception of a proper diet has been shaped by many factors over the years, but government and related agencies have played a major role in the demonization of fat. We need to understand that there are alternatives to conventional wisdom that may be healthier for us in the long run. In the end, we're all trying to live our lives to the fullest and enjoy the time that we have here. And these alternate diets may be the answer to any dietary or health issues you might be experiencing. And you might even prefer a different low-carb lifestyle. All it takes is to give it a try. Thank you.